Great. So super excited about this webinar. We have Kevin Lau with us, who's, I think that everybody knows him and doesn't need many introductions, but he's been in the space and one of the leaders in the space. He worked at companies like Marketo and built one of the most amazing and I think advanced and, ahead of his time in a way programs there. Now at F5, building a whole new concept around customer engagement, and we're happy to learn a little bit about that. And mostly understand how he builds great teams and how he builds a great story and business case for his management to actually help him and support him in building those teams and running those programs and following his vision. So Kevin will share a lot of that. Before we kick off, just, a couple of things I wanted to share while we go through this. So let me just share my deck in a minute. Yeah, so today we want to talk about building, awesome teams and driving retention, driving growth, and doing that through customer engagement. Kevin is our, keynote speaker here. He's going to take you through his process, his, kind of blueprint, if you will, and some of the things that he's learned across his journey. We'll get into your deck in a minute, Kevin, but if you just want to, introduce yourself for those who maybe don't know you, even though I'm pretty sure that everybody does.
Sure. Well, thanks, Gail, and also Kalina for helping organize this. My name again is Kevin Lau. I've been in the customer marketing space. It's going to date myself a little bit, but probably about like 14 years now. But it's been a great experience working directly with all these amazing custom companies. Been in Silicon Valley for most of my career, and then recently moved down to San Diego about 2 years ago. But excited to kind of talk to you guys about some of the things that I've learned along this way to help shorten your learning curve.
Cool. And just to say today, what we'll, again, this is exciting. Happy to have you with us, Kevin. What we'll do today is really talk about that, the business case, how to build a great team. Kevin prepared some information for you and some sharing a lot of his, knowledge and learning. So that's exciting. These are some of the things we'll touch. We want to keep it real. If you have questions, just put them in the Q&A. We'll take them through as we go, put them in the chat. Q&A is better for us to manage, but you can put them in the chat. Feel free to kind of ping along the way with your questions and whatnot. We'll also run a poll, and basically 5 people will just randomly get audibles from us. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of the session today. Just mentioning that we welcome everybody here to join us in other activities that we do. So we're going to have, following this webinar, actually, we're going to have on November 29th after Thanksgiving, a workshop session that kind of goes into more details about, how you build the playbook for getting the budget and the blueprint for, getting customer marketing ramped up in 2020 or scaled up in 2024. Things like what are the revenue first notions you need to be able to talk about and convey to your leadership, building the business case, both, the data and the presentation, how to present it, getting, executive and CMO buy-in, and so on. We also invite you to join CLG Campus. Ping us if you're searching for people that you want to hire, or you're searching for jobs and you see some of those jobs out there and you want to see if we can help and connect to those customers or people. And if your CMO is by any chance in the Bay Area, we have 2 events, November 16th and November 21st, 4 CMOs, one in San Francisco, one in Palo Alto. Happy to invite them to help you build that business case and that notion around why CMOs should double down on customer marketing. For those who don't know BASE, very quick introduction. Customer marketing platform, been around for 5 years. These are some of our customers. We focus both on the lifecycle marketing aspects, such as adoption, upsell, cross-sell, retention marketing, and on the classic advocacy and references, reviews, and everything that has to impact really leveraging customers for demand generation and for growth. We're also an Israeli-based company. So we had a headquartered in Israel. We have teams also in Europe, and we have teams in the US. Israel is now at war. Casualties on both sides. Everybody loses from war. So hopefully they will be over soon, but, wanted kind of to mention the fact that we kind of stand with Israel as part of, against the war against terror. Moving from that, back into base and the product. So I think what's unique about base in this space is that, and Kevin will talk about customer engagement. We've been looking at customer engagement for a while now. Our premise is that we first want to understand the customer journey and really know this customer is now, active in your community and part of your, and not necessarily an advocate. I'm using the word customer. Active in the community and has finished courses in your academy or your LMS, and he's looking at stuff in the knowledge base, and he opened the ticket in the support side, and so on and so forth. Like, really understand their post-sale journey. They come to your event, they participate. Of course, they're an advocate and they're speaking in the event, but really tap into the account and user journey. Engage them in many ways as part of that journey for many use cases: advocacy, retention, adoption, and so on. And then really track how all that impacts, in sense of conversion, revenue, and so on. We look at the platform from, kind of three pillars because of that. So there's the collaboration hub, where basically your sales team, many times we serve and support the sales team. So how they inside CRM can, find customers and leverage them, which logos they can use, which customers can take a reference, which videos they can use, which customers can be in an RFP, and so on and so forth. And leverage that, but then also having a place for customer marketers, for customer engagement managers to be able to run different campaigns and different activities and track and see what works. And then the whole end user experience. So how do you engage your customers in a new way, in a more holistic way throughout their journey, and really make sure that once they become a customer, there's not many teams like product and customer success and sales and marketing all reaching out to the customer in the same time in different manners, but really one holistic journey throughout all their interfaces and touch points, including your product. So that's a little bit about what Base is about, and happy to share more. These are some examples of our customers and how we engage within in-app, in their community, in designated hubs, and so on. Wanted to mention before we dive into today's session that we had a webinar just 2 weeks ago. We talked about referral marketing and how that's one of the drivers for revenue. That's one of the things you can launch as basically a pilot program and tell your CMO or your manager, hey, let's just see how we generate revenue from our customers for referrals. So this is an example of one of our customers whereas, in 2.5 years, they've generated, this amount of referrals, these amount qualified and closed one, and really, about 140 referrals per year, 60% qualified, generated over $1 million in revenue just from referral from customers. And we're running right now, a promotion where you could basically try and buy referral marketing. Again, I think it's a kind of no risk way to introduce to your company, introduce to your management, hey, let's try doing some customer programs and see how it works and the revenue influence. We're sharing the link here in the chat, but happy to talk to you about how you can roll that quickly. And now let's dive really into today's session, and then I'll kind of pass it to Kevin. So one of the things, like I said, we're going to have a workshop at the end of the month and talk about, this kind of building the case for customer-led growth and customer engagement and the revenue impact. How do you have a blueprint for that? What are the steps to take? So Kevin is going to share his blueprint, and we're going to share ours in that workshop at the end of the month, but kind of giving you a sneak peek. So things that we have seen that work and the way that we kind of think about it is, and some of this I think is very shared between us and Kevin from what I kind of know he's going to share. I think some of it definitely aligns. So one of the things is really having a vision for CLG. Like, there's a different story you tell when you talk about, hey, we're going to run an advocacy program, or we're doing a reference program, or we're doing a CAB, or any one of those singular programs, versus coming and talking about, I want to do customer lifecycle marketing. I want to engage my customers throughout their journey, and I want to generate different journeys and use cases, from adoption to advocacy to upsell to retention and so on. You normally should start with what's broken. Like, ideally, you want to get buy-in by telling, sharing within the company, hey, here's how our customers are overused or abused, or on the other hand, we have a lot of customers who are neglected and they don't even finish their onboarding because we don't have automation around that, or we're not doing the right steps around, creating community and engagement, and that's why we can't show, higher retention. If we did that, there's data that shows that community lifecycle engagement actually improves retention and so on. So part of it is really showing what's broken in the post-sale journey, then talking about the use cases you can support, and really honing in on the revenue influence, like how customer marketing can influence new business, which we all know from advocacy references, the 3 Rs, referrals, reviews, references, and so on. How it can impact growth business, so upsell, cross-sell, expansion campaigns, and how it can impact recurring business, which we talked about a little bit about retention marketing and proving that actually lifecycle engagement, and I don't know if Kevin has data to share from his campaigns or things, but how actually the fact that you engage customers really helps overall retention. Then kind of build the whole budget and business case and how you want to roll it out in phases. It's, that's part of what we're talking about here. Like really talk through like a 3, 6, 12-month, 24-month kind of plan, and not get quick wins, but not try to win everything at once. Like really show people a vision that is a year and a 2-year vision split by little particles that are, things we're going to launch, wins we're going to have, and how this is going to, work out. And really think, when you think about executive buy-in, and with this I will end, think about a couple of, different types of executives. Your boss, whether it's a CMO or chief customer officer, but then their peers, like the CFO who approves the budget, the CRO who's, kind of owning sales as well, chief customer officer, CEO, like really thinking about how you help your boss socialize and evangelize the story of CLG with their peers, and how do you together tell the story to different, stakeholders. And the last thing is really think about why now. I mean, why do we need to do more now? Why do we need to double down on more team, more resources, tools, whatever it is now? I think these are some of the things we're going to talk about in that. And I think they tie into this story about, building your team and building a business case for 2024. With that, just examples of the data that we hope you can share. So these are some of the examples where HubSpot is with us for 3 years now, and they can definitely share that they have more than 50% retention when they leverage base with their customers throughout their life cycle. And Radware, another customer with us for 3 years now, again, they can show that they grow ACV. They run campaigns, on Marketo and other tools, but when they run, customer lifecycle campaigns with base, they can grow ACV about 3x. And then Alteryx, another one of our, customers, can show the impact on new business from references, and how when they leverage advocacy for references, they close deals faster and they close deals bigger. So these are some of the metrics that we think that are very important as part of the story of growing your team and building your business for 2024. With that, I will pass the baton to Kevin, because I think he has a lot to share with us all. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and feel free to ask questions as we go. And thank you for joining us.
Okay, awesome. Let me share my screen. Can you guys all see this? Okay. Yeah. Well, let's just go ahead and dive into it. So today I'm really going to be talking about, how to build your CMA dream team, really focused on driving some of the things that Gal mentioned about lifecycle, retention, making sure that you're building a strong foundation for ultimately being able to create advocates for your company. And so we'll go into, some of the things specifically we'll talk about. So we'll start to chat about how to build your vision, your charter, what really goes into executive stakeholder alignment, which ultimately kind of goes into making a case for additional budget, resources, etc. How do you actually build a high performance team, whether you're a team of 1, you're looking to build a team of 10, and everything else in between, and being able to hire those really exceptional leaders, and also kind of paving the way for future-proofing your organization, so you can start to think about future expansion down the road. So I think I always like to start my presentations with memes, because that's just how I like to communicate, especially crunchy moments in time. But I've been at Adobe for probably the past almost 6 years, and the one thing I would say about Adobe is, like, we had a very structured organization. We had upwards of 50 plus people that were supporting customer marketing, retention marketing. And then when I made the pivot about 1.5 years ago to join F5, very different industry. For those of you guys that are familiar with security is probably one of the most old school industries, similar to probably healthcare, manufacturing, etc. And so the operational processes, everything that kind of inherited when I joined on day one of F5, it was very old school. There was a lot of things that we had to figure out. Um, table stakes things, whether it was building on customer reference programs, focusing on customer stories, all that kind of stuff came with as we thought about sort of that evolution of where we want to go a year from there. And so I share that because my journey at F5, probably not too dissimilar from other folks, especially in that first 1 to 90 days, was really focused on that onboarding experience. I joke with my team about going through the 7 stages of grief just because I think as you join a new organization, there is a level of understanding. You have to kind of understand your product portfolio, who's who within the organization, who your customers are, but really being able to establish a point of view quickly and then establishing sort of your future state charter. So that was something that I tried to establish within that first 60 to 90 days. And then I started to be invited to take on more of a larger remit within supporting a company-wide mission, which led up to some of our corporate promises. And then within month 4, really launching our first bootstrap projects, really from a grassroots effort. And then we had a couple layoffs and things that happened. And then I started to expand my remit around month 8. And then a year from now, really establishing our future state vision of what are we doing going to FY24. So we actually kicked off our Q1 beginning of October. And so we're really in the beginning of the new calendar year. And so I could talk a little bit more about what went into the planning. How did we make the case for additional budget, headcount expansion as part of this presentation? So I like to always kind of think about what are the kind of key steps you want to take away from if you had to build sort of an award-winning team. And usually I start with things about asking the right type of questions because it really talks about internally what is the thought process you need to have before you're even taking on the challenge. And then we'll talk about identifying customer friction points, driving that internal collaboration and stakeholder alignment, helping to really address some of the gaps with your charter, and enrolling your team and your leadership team in your future state vision, as well as developing that team culture together. And the last one are really about charting the path forward. So let's go ahead and dive into it. And if you guys have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And Gail will probably just interrupt me if there's anything that comes up. So really the first one, this goes back to whether I start a new job, new project. I always want to focus internally on what are we ultimately trying to solve here? What's the remit? What are we specifically taking on in comparison to other teams? What are those identified swim lanes that we can drive success? Another way to kind of think about it, what are the jobs to be done? Not necessarily individuals, but the actual projects that need to be achieved as part of your remit. What does ultimately your leadership team care about? This goes back to really understanding the priorities, especially if you're a publicly traded company, looking at analyst relation calls or investor calls to see what is it that your CEO is talking about, and how can you make your boss's job easier, and what can you execute within a 90-day time frame, and who can you partner with to ultimately get this shit done and have those quick wins across your team, and then at the same time being able to measure success and impact. And then step 2 is really being able to kind of identify the friction points within your customer journey. And these are ways that you'll uncover essentially based on interviewing your customers, whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many, conversations. Gong recordings are also great to do this. There's also feedback that happens. So whether you own, voice of the customer initiatives like CSAT, NPS, customer effort score, also looking at verbatims, this is all just rich data and insights that you can start to take back with your team as you start to develop your future state program. So if you notice that there's gaps that currently exist, you also were hired for a very specific role. This is where you can start to build out your formal charter and socialize that based on the feedback that you hear directly from your customers. And then if there is, whether it's yourself or someone within your team, focus on customer journey mapping. I like to look at this as kind of marking out specifically touch points within the journey where you could have milestones where you could either build a program or initiative in partnership with others to kind of showcase how can you have an impact within that buy experience, from if you have a trial all the way to the time that a customer purchases your solution, as well as looking at the ownership experience from deploy all the way through advocate. And then data and insights. This goes hand in hand with some of the other two buckets that you see on this slide. But if you have any data on churn analysis, win-loss reports, usage and telemetry data, this is where it really makes a big difference if you can be best friends with whoever owns the data and insights organization, marketing operations, sales and operations. Those are all folks that can help you pull this data relatively easy. I know, they do this on a regular basis when they're doing reporting. And so if you can get access to that, this will help you tremendously as you build out your programs. And then step
Kevin, I
three,
guess
which
one
is,
question
I think,
before
one
we,
of the most, oh, sorry.
yeah, just one quick question. So I think, we talk a lot about journey mapping, and I think maybe for some people it might be a bit, fuzzy. Like, so what, when you think about that, what is the outcome that you want to get to? Like, why are we doing journey mapping, and what ideally do you want to get at the end of it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So one thing I didn't mention at the very beginning was that, F5 is going through a massive transformation from a legacy hardware organization. We've been doing that for 20 plus years, and we've made that pivot to SaaS about a year ago. And if you think about the stages, the buying stages of a customer in hardware versus SaaS, it's very different, right? Hardware, you have an on-prem device or an appliance essentially. And so when a customer receives that service, it's very different than a software where they could just turn it on and people get access to a login, et cetera. And
Right.
so journey mapping for us became a company-wide exercise. And we actually literally put it on a board or white, on a screen and kind of showed all the different stages of the journey and really kind of mapped out where are the different touch points that you could partner with customer success support to helpfully make the customer experience even better. And so if you're exploring journey mapping for the first time, this is a way where you could start to actually show value for the types of programs that you want to be able to run in partnership with the teams that I kind of mentioned. And they could even be little things. So I'll give you an example. If you wanted to be able to map out in the ownership experience, so essentially customer onboarding is usually that first touch point when they're deploying a new software. You could create an initiative that says, hey, I want to make sure that our onboarding experience is scalable. It's hitting on the right initiative so that a customer understands what is it that they've purchased within that first 30, 60, 90 days to showcase why your product is more important than, a potential competitor solution. And it really cements early stages, the likelihood that a customer wants to stay with you long term. And so you could map out specifically, swim lanes for what you and customer marketing do in partnership with customer success and support to really support that shared goal initiative around onboarding.
Cool.
Yeah, so hopefully that's helpful. And so step three, and this kind of goes aligned literally kind of with what we just talked about, but as you're having those listening tours with your customers, you also will do this with your stakeholders. And typically, I think within organizations, we typically engage very closely with sales, customer support, success, et cetera. We tend to be very cross-functional in nature. And so I think it's helpful as you start to identify gaps that you hear directly from your customers and you hear that feedback. This is where you can start to collaborate and create those shared outcomes with your internal stakeholders. BHAG stands for big, hairy, audacious goals. So really chart something that's really incredible that may take multiple teams to kind of collaborate together to be able to achieve them. They could likely be a yearly initiative. They could be multi-year in nature, and then be able to kind of execute against those goals and showcase what you're actually doing with your different stakeholders internally and showcase those wins over time. That's really kind of what we're talking about here with step three. And, I mentioned this a little bit earlier too, but it's helpful to also have a very strong point of view of getting people to kind of rally behind a focus area. So for us, customer retention was something that was never really on the radar for folks, at F5. And so I wanted to plant the seed about building in a more formal retention program that's focused on things like onboarding, but not just onboarding, but making sure that there is a path for making sure that the customer is happy, successful, they want to renew with us, and builds the runway for future upsell, cross-sell opportunities down the road. I mentioned earlier about listening to analysts and earning calls. this is actually one of the greatest things that you could do to align your programs directly to what your CEO is saying. So the more that you can talk about, bigger state objectives aligned to reducing friction or making sure that you're doubling down on SaaS. Those are things that we particularly called out in our narrative when we asked for funding, when we asked for internal alignment, when we asked for additional headcount to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're telling the same type of story. The other thing I think that's helpful is, shifting the conversation. How are you reporting out on your success and wins? Obviously, if you use technologies like Base or others, this will be able to help tell your story using the data and insights that are available to you. But if you're just getting started, focus on things that can get people to rally behind your cause. So if you have to start with some basic things, like it could be number of advocates versus advocates that are engaged, or in accounts that may have been churned. And so they can kind of see that difference in that, how you're ultimately supporting that initiative. And then time to value, I think, is also another key thing. But it could also be focusing on like transforming community as a destination for driving that scalable onboarding and enablement. And so step 4, I think, kind of goes into this as far as addressing, gaps within your charter. So this was actually something that, Forrester at the recent B2B summit, they showcased an example of this. I kind of changed it a little bit based on our journey mapping stages, but essentially it's the same thing. So on the left-hand slide, this is in theory what we all kind of know as the typical journey map that most organizations go through. The problem, though, is with marketers, and I guess it could actually be anyone within your organization. In most cases, we tend to overly rotate on the discover and try buy phases. Usually what I'm talking about specifically is the prospecting journey. So how do we get that new logo in the door? Jill Rowley, when I used to work with her, she used to tell me, we as organizations tend to be drunk on inbound. And I think that ultimately is the case. We focus so much on getting that new shiny logo that we don't really care enough about that post-sale journey. Like, what are we doing after that experience? And so that third diagram really showcases how our customers actually live it today. Typically they might have very minimal support, if anything, where they might be getting their login details. They might have, a couple of resources here and there, but beyond that, they're almost left to themselves to figure out how to use your product or your solution. And then when it comes up to renewal about 6 months, a year later, sometimes we're often surprised why they didn't renew with us. And so this is a way they kind of flip the script and help you kind of adopt a more customer obsessed mentality, but also as a jumping off point that you can start to socialize with your stakeholders internally too. So ultimately, when you're starting to build out your charter, think about how you can address, bigger customer experience gaps in relation to customer marketing and other things. I always like to focus on things that, are driving cross-functional change within your organization. It could even be things that you don't even own yet within your organization today, and also be able to make it very easy and shareable. And so I'll give you a couple examples. These are some of the charters that we've built just, over the past several years at both Marketo and Adobe, and then more recently at F5, but have a very specific mission statement that encapsulates what is it your team is focused on? What is your future state remit? What do you care about? And what are those pillars below that ultimately shape up to supporting those outcomes? And so each of these programs have a different flavor of the same thing, but essentially, this is your chance to kind of build the case for why you should own things like experiential marketing, which is focused on building out, personalized experiences through events and other touch points. We talked a lot about advocacy and life cycle, and as well as customer comms on how do you deliver more personalized and meaningful engagements to drive that value, and think about how do you deliver it through email and other touch points here. But these are kind of some examples you can kind of cut and paste essentially as you think about building your own charter or making the case for future expansion within your companies. And so I'll talk a little bit about my charter that we have at F5 today. So following that same type of philosophy, we've, why reinvent the wheel essentially if you've already kind of built something, but this is sort of the template that we've used over the past several years that starts to get, attention not only from our executive leadership team, but also becomes a one-pager example of how you could socialize this to your stakeholders. So as I mentioned, our mission statement is very clear. It's develop and execute a unified customer engagement journey to focus on driving customer passion, creating those exceptional experiences, driving product adoption and retention, and ultimately creating F5 customers for life. And I try to emphasize the customers for life piece because this goes beyond the transactional relationships that you will have with a customer for in a renewal timeframe. One of the key things that I've learned at Marketo and Adobe is that as you build relationships with customers, those customers, regardless of how long they stay at their current company, they will bring your technology with them in their future organizations. And that, ultimately creates sort of that lifelong relationship. It creates that lifelong advocacy from company to company. And those still kind of transcend relationships I have today with those same individuals. And so specifically, as we think about the mission statement, what are the kind of the core elements of my organization that we have today? So we have voice of the customer, which is how do we leverage things like NPS and feedback to drive more actionable insights that all account teams can kind of lean into as they start to think about what are the friction points that they need to address and how can they make sure that the customer is satisfied and happy. Advocacy, which we all know, which is really about that igniting that customer passion, loyalty. Retention marketing is developing that scalable lifecycle program. So whether it's email, in-product messaging, webinars, these all kind of focus within that retention marketing umbrella. And then customer comms, which is about that, how do we deliver and govern the way that we coordinate the right type of communications, the right customer at the right time.
Kevin,
And
I guess
so,
one question on that would be, this all looks and sounds great, but organizations have politics and they have the
sure.
ways that they do things. And you come and you say, hey, but our team will govern, customer communications, which is great for the customer experience and great for the company. But at the end of the day, okay, but then customer success would say, but we talk with the customers, and sales will say, but we talk with the customers, and product teams will say, but we want to talk to the customers, and other
Sure.
marketing team want to talk to the customer. So it's like, how do you actually get that type of collaboration, I guess, buy-in, alignment of people, not just, it's the vision, but then it's also the fact that your team owns the vision and other teams need to somehow, adhere to that or collaborate with you versus each one doing their own thing and, saying that they own the customer or they own the communication.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that it's really how can we create sort of that better together story? So each function, typically has their core set of deliverables, the things that they are known for that they have to be able to execute against, right? Like, so customer success, we could say they own sort of driving the adoption, the retention, maybe even the renewal conversation, the upsell contractually, and the one-to-one customer engagement. But what they don't do necessarily is being able to build programs at scale. I would say most customer success leaders may not want their CS teams to focus on marketing activities, whether it's developing an email campaign or dealing with the mechanics of putting on a webinar or a user group for that matter. And so I think the case that you can kind of build within customer comms or even any of these functions here is that you're really there to kind of help quarterback the efforts cross-functionally internally. You're not necessarily trying to step on toes and saying, hey, I want to take over your remit, but it's like, how can I work with your team to help you drive better scalability, make sure the customer is successful? Because that's ultimately what we care about. We want to make sure that we're doing everything in a unified fashion versus siloed organizations, which create more friction, more challenges long term. And so that's kind of the story that I've used, to communicate this, as opposed to, making this a land grab where we're saying, hey, we want to do this. We're fighting with you. No, it's really about how do we collaborate better. Yeah.
Cool.
And so, one thing that's also great is that Nick Mehta is actually one of our board members at F5, and he's actually a huge believer. If you follow him on LinkedIn, he's obviously he posts a lot of great content on a regular basis, but he actually focuses a lot about retention as sort of that new growth driver. And so I've been actually using that as a mechanism to kind of push forward our agenda around why we need to invest in this. Why does community also need to be part of this journey? And so it's been really great to kind of see that collaboration point there with him. The other thing that we've talked about is kind of enrolling your team in your vision as well as your leadership team. So, 6 to 7 months ago, I basically had to take over a new organization where we had some rifts, we had some challenges, we had some consolidation that we had to do. And I really had to kind of map out what is it that we want to be able to build together as a collective organization. Number one, what is the major areas that we need to address in our gaps as far as what's affecting the customer, but also how can we streamline what we do and drive better scalability. And I'm also a big believer of building out centers of excellence on all things focus on customer engagement as an example. And so that's where we started to plant the seed of building out this new organization and enrolling your team as well as your stakeholders and your leadership team behind it. The one thing I also say is that I had a very strong advocate in my boss who actually, her former title was Chief Customer Experience Officer, Chief Customer Experience and Marketing Officer, and she actually changed her business title when I actually realigned my organization under customer engagement. So there was sort of that alignment already there too, which actually helped push forward our narrative as well. And so there are a couple stages when you're starting to build out a new organization. And if you've seen sort of like the process around forming, storming, and norming, this is kind of a way to also think about it. So forming, for example, was kind of really establishing, the ways of working, what's the rhythm of business, what did we have to do and accomplish as part of our jobs, but also how do we create that shared value that ignites, team passion, excitement around what are we rallying behind? And this is kind of the same process as you engage your stakeholders on why should they care about it. The storming phase was really just kind of addressing the team crunchiness. So there's different personalities, there's politics that get involved. There's also gaps that you need to fill with hiring and budget. And this is where you start to make that case for where do you need to get that incremental to be able to achieve sort of the outcomes you've set for the year, and then be able to kind of reprioritize the right work in relation to that. Because what I found was that some of the folks on my team were doing things that were not even a priority, and so I had to kind of reshuffle some of the resources and the remit that each person was focused on. And then you get to the point where you're starting to norming, where you're establishing those strategic priorities and then collaborating to grow those relationships and focus on the best practice sharing. So what we did actually as an organization as we moved into FY24 is we actually built these year-long missions. So each of these missions has a subset of multiple different commitments or projects that ladder up to a specific narrative that we're trying to tell. So as an example, one of our narratives was build a raving fan base of FF customers. And as part of that, there's mechanics that go into it on, how do we do that? Well, one of them is building out a reference program. The second thing could be, building out a more formalized CAB program or reimagining what we're doing there, as well as some other things around retention marketing. So these became central pillars that helped us tell our story to our internal teams, but also it helped align each of the individuals on my team focusing on, the outcome that they're going to deliver that's laddered up to the mission. And then the last thing is sort of like performing as the mission gets kicked off, making sure that they're clear on their goals, but also celebrating those milestones along the way. So as we come to the close of our Q1 in the next, 2 months, we'll be able to kind of celebrate what are the things that the team did to achieve these outcomes, focus on the yearly goals. And then the other thing is kind of getting people to kind of rally behind what does customer obsession look like? What could it be for an organization? And so I tried to map out specifically, this is actually a slide that I've shared specifically with stakeholders, whether it was our CEO, CMO, et cetera, on how each of these things kind of come together to drive that customer-led growth that even Gal talked about. The one thing that you'll notice in this diagram is that it doesn't include community necessarily, but that's actually another pillar that we're incorporating in an organization fairly soon. And so we're having these ongoing conversations on how do you plant the seeds? Why does it make sense to bring all these functions together? And then it comes to a point where it becomes painfully obvious in the minds of your team members as well as others on why these functions kind of should be part of the same organization. So that's been kind of the talk track that we've used to kind of showcase, why does it make sense that all these kind of focus on customer-led growth as one organization. The other thing that I like to do as far as building sort of like team culture So it goes beyond a little bit just the day-to-day customer marketing, but there's a couple things that you could do, whether you're a team of 1, 3, 10, or you're expanding beyond that. One thing is you can download an app called Superpowers. And Superpowers is kind of a cool app where you can actually get people to take a 5 to 10 minute quiz essentially that showcases what are their two superpowers, the things that they are exceptionally great at, and what are their blind spots? What are the things that they need to work on potentially that could be an area that they want to focus on? And then I also like to use Clifton Strengths. There's 5 to 10 other different assessments out there, but I like Clifton Strengths in particular because it focuses on these 4 quadrants around executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And for anyone that's taken Clifton Strengths, you know that you'll get a report, a very detailed report on showcasing what are your 6, strengths that you excel on. But also it shows you what are some of the gaps potentially with each of your strengths. And I actually use that as a, ongoing coaching thing for myself on how I can improve as a leader. And I think this gives you kind of a baseline to understand who is everyone on your team, what are their strengths, what are the things that they can kind of focus on. And then what I like to do is create sort of a duo exercise. So duos is a way where you could pair up folks in your organization together based on who has a strength and who has a weakness or something that they need to work on, and how they can kind of collaborate together to address some of the blind spots they might have. So this is kind of a fun thing that you could do. You could set it as a quarterly exercise. You could do it as a year-long thing. I had everyone on my team buddy up with essentially someone in the organization to do this and engage with their duo on a regular basis. And then you could also do it with folks outside of your organization. So if you want to build a stronger relationship with, let's say, a peer within the customer success organization, have them actually take this exercise. And this will actually build and strengthen the relationship that you have, and do it in a more coordinated fashion to kind of drive this outcome. So that's kind of a fun thing that you could do as well. And then what happens is, I actually had someone on my team that focused on, cultivating all the insights and showing where there are potential gaps that we need to address. So as you kind of see, my team's it's actually pretty balanced. I think influencing is one thing that we could get better on, but they're also really great at relationship building, strategic, and executing. And so you can use it as a way to create highlights or outcomes or areas that you want to focus on in a quarter. The other thing is I like to infuse humor in just day-to-day activities, especially when you're addressing issues or things that sometimes get a little bit crunchy, like I said. So I always post, memes with my team. I even got some folks that have never done memes or created a meme before, and they start to do this more regularly. So this is kind of just one thing that I like to do as I build my culture within the organization. And then the last thing is just chart the path forward as you kind of start to build your remit. It's helpful to kind of showcase what does best in class look like? What are iconic brands really doing that you could potentially model and use an example as you kind of build it within your own company or organization. So I like to highlight exceptional programs, things that, maybe we've done in the past, as well as iconic brands, like I said, and then kind of showcasing those wins over time. And then people start to get ideas. So whether you're trying to build out a customer awards program or something else, this is kind of a way that you can say, hey, this is what, Cisco has done. This is what Adobe has done. Maybe we could model it. Maybe we don't have necessarily the same amount of money or budget to pull it off. But if we could do maybe a 10% version of what that could look like, we would still have a great outcome. And then kind of bring in other experts to show what's possible. So when I try to make the case for wanting to build out adoption or retention programs, rather than my colleagues and other folks internally hearing from me directly, I brought in folks that have already done this successfully, folks that I've worked with at Adobe, where they did a more formal lunch and learn. They kind of showcase what's possible with building out retention as an organization and discipline within F5. And they were able to answer all the questions, and it laid the foundation for ultimately helping us get that additional headcount. And then also kind of make the case for prioritizing what's next for your boss. And so my boss has always asked me, what is your vision that you want to accomplish over the next 12 to 24 months? And what does that vision look like 3 to 5 years from now? So short-term and long-term outcomes. And it's helpful to always have this in the back of your mind, whether it's developing an organization chart, putting together some job descriptions, making it really easy for your boss to advocate for you at the executive level on why you need these gaps to be filled and how ultimately it makes the most business sense to be able to have this prioritized. So if you know exactly what you need in your next headcount, make that crystal clear on exactly what that person's going to own, what they're going to be doing, and how they're going to be partnering to drive an outcome.
Kevin, I guess
And
one question
then,
here is,
yeah,
um, so a lot of the people also from looking from the poll, a lot of people are in smaller team, right? Teams of one to three, okay, versus Marketo, Cisco, Adobe F5.
sure.
Um, so when you think about, okay, now I need to decide what I'm doing in 2024 based on everything that you laid out here, but on a team of three people, a team of two people, how would you, I don't know, think through that?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple ways that you can kind of test the waters. So if you're looking to build the case for additional headcount or resourcing, I always like to kind of test and run a pilot. If you're able to kick something off, you're able to showcase some kind of success or win, and if the organization responds well to it, then you can start to make the case for maybe getting additional budget or resource to put some more, behind it. And that's how I've been able to go from a budget of about 200,000 to over $1 million just over the past couple quarters by simply being able to test things and then just kind of showcasing what they've been able to do for the organization. I think sometimes we forget that even just being able to showcase and highlight our wins, sometimes that may feel a little bit weird because we don't like to, brag about what we're doing. But I think in the case of if you're trying to get headcount and resourcing, this needs to be a must-have thing that you do on a regular basis. Just like if you're showcasing a new customer story, you want people to be able to absorb the information and start to use it in their go-to-market campaigns, right? Like it doesn't benefit anyone if you just publish a story, put it on your website, and no one actually looks at it. You have to be a little bit more proactive. And I think in the case if you're trying to build an organization, it goes in the same way. Like I was actually talking to another colleague in the industry. She had a team of about herself and one other person, and she wanted to make the case for getting an additional 2 to 3 individuals, and she was going to have a conversation with her CEO. They went through some rifts and some changes. Her boss, her champion left, and so she had to kind of reprioritize and showcase what she does. And I kind of literally showed her the exact same process. It's you want to be able to showcase what's possible. Even if you're a team of 1 or 2 individuals right now, it doesn't mean that needs to be the case a year from now. And whether that happens within that 12 months or it takes 13 doesn't really matter. I think you always want to be able to plant the seeds ahead of time so that, your message resonates with someone else. Like we even got, as another example, and then I'll move on. There was a GM that was responsible for a line of business within F5. That person actually had incremental budget available that, they were able to reprioritize to our team that actually unlocked 2 new additional headcount that we're actually hiring for right now. And that became organizational budget that came outside of our team. So by able to building that alignment with that person, showcasing why we need this, we were able to open up those resources. So it doesn't always happen directly from your boss. It's also from their peers. If you can kind of build that case on how this is good for the entire company, this is where it starts to open up the floodgates for you a bit. And it doesn't have to be necessarily, millions of dollars, but if you have sort of that quick win, you might be able to get additional 20, 30K that might help fund, getting base on board or another technology that will help, make your job easier when it comes to reporting metrics and whatnot.
Do you have an example of one of those experiments or quick wins that you think people can pull just to show and kind of?
Yeah. So I think so most people on this call, we all do everything from customer stories to references, getting reviews. One thing I think within security in particular, it's very difficult to get customers that want to go on the record because, security companies, there's a lot of compliance and issues that they have to go through. And so getting them to proactively advocate for a vendor is very difficult, but they were open to writing a review for us. And Gartner Peer Insights ends up being something that is, hugely impactful for our organization because they rely, customers rely very heavily on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We're an enterprise company. We compete with many other organizations like Peloton Networks, et cetera. And we didn't really have a lot of momentum within Gartner Peer Insights. And so we wanted to run a campaign. We did something initially where, we want to partner with sales, we want to run a pilot. We had an initial target of, what if we could just get, 10 to 15 new reviews on Gartner? Nothing crazy, something that we want to accomplish as a quarterly goal. We partnered with the sales team. At first it was a little bit staggered, wasn't really much growth and momentum. And then what I started to do was run a weekly, update or a leaderboard. And with salespeople, I think one of the cool things is that they're very motivated by recognition as well as money. But I think they like to see their name in lights, and they like to, they don't want another person to take their glory. And so we kind of use a weekly leaderboard to kind of showcase the momentum we're having with reviews. And by the end of it, we ended up getting about 65 reviews that helped influence our MQ placement. I think now today we have over 100 and 120 reviews that have been gathered. And so what I'm trying to say is that you start to plant the seed and showcase something small, and it starts to pick up momentum on its own. And that's kind of a way they can kind of build this in a small way to kind of showcase the things that your team is capable of taking on. And you can kind of do the same thing with building out an email nurture or launching a community or launching your first advocacy initiative. So it doesn't have to be anything super grand or things that would take up necessarily a lot of time or resources, but something you can kind of do as a grassroots efforts, kind of test the waters and see if there's interest, and then really be able to double down on that.
Cool.
Yeah. I think I have just maybe one or two slides left. I think the last thing is you think about scale. This was a topic that, I did a poll on LinkedIn. People ask questions around like, how do you build executive alignment? How do you also scale your programs, and how do you launch your programs? I think if you can start to create a predictable flywheel that also aligns to your customer journey, this becomes a lot easier for you to make your case for addressing inefficiencies and potentially helping you also get additional budget and revenue. And so the way that you can kind of do this is if you had sort of this is sort of the own journey within, that we use within F5, but, ultimately this is kind of supporting NRR, so net recurring revenue, and making sure the customer wants to renew with this, and there's a subscription revenue behind it. You can kind of map out certain stages along the journey that you could specifically quarterback in partnership with other teams. I won't go through all of these different buckets, but let's just use the one in green as an example under deploy and use. This is typically the one that I think should deserve the most time and attention because it's focused on onboarding. If you do this really well, it starts to open up the gates for everything else to unlock within, that customer relationship. If you want future advocates, you want to focus on onboarding as a key touch point. And so we use this as a way to showcase how our team and customer success and support can all work together to drive a scalable onboarding model that's focused on maybe deploying a couple emails, maybe a welcome kit that's focused on identifying here's your touch points for if you have an escalation, if you have a challenge, go to these individuals. Where can you find some self-service resources? How can you leverage community? And it packages it up in a way where it becomes a shared goal and outcome. And the customer understands, where's a centralized location for finding information, especially when they need it. And so they don't always have to nag like their CSM or someone else to be able to get that support. So that's kind of one way you can kind of think about using this journey slide to showcase where you can partner with other teams to drive an outcome. And then the other thing is show ultimately kind of what you need. So I like to talk about, how can you build an organization chart that's, future-proofing where you want to head in the next, 6 to 12 months. Also kind of showcasing where does customer marketing typically sit in an organization. In my case, I was reporting, I probably had 5 different bosses over the past year that I was at F5, but ultimately I landed at reporting the CMO at the last stint. But showcasing, if you're a team of 1, 2, or 3, what could that look like? Where do you want to expand next in the future? And then if you're a team of 3 to 5, where could that go? What is that focus area? And then a team of 5 to 10. And then also if you're a larger organization and you have global teams, what could that also look like? So a couple different scenarios and outcomes. And then also, you can use this as a template as well. I think the other side of it that sometimes we as custom marketers forget is that there is a level of business acumen that your C-suite leaders are kind of expecting when you ask for budgeting and resourcing, right? So make it really clear, easy, specifically, what is it that you need? What is it going to cost? And what's the approximate time to value? I think sometimes we don't articulate that enough and these sometimes could be even just estimates, but if you got, let's say, 600,000, what could that actually mean for you in terms of the results you could drive or the outcome you want to have? What's the company impact? And so you could use this as a template to showcase, 3 different scenarios, good, better, best. My boss likes to say, how can you t-shirt size the investment? It's a best case if you get 600,000, but let's say you get, the better situation, you still get 400,000, you're still happy with it. You can still deploy the money any way that you want. So I think, and this is just kind of showcasing what's possible when you start to create sort of those outcomes and those initiatives. But I think for the sake of time, I'll pause there, open to any other questions you guys might have before we wrap up.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for sharing all of this. It's great. One question that came up goes back to you can see it in the Q&A, but it goes back to, it's anonymous. I don't know who it is, but basically he or she are asking I'm running a small team, a team of one. Like all of this is essentially like, how do I start from scratch? Looks a bit overwhelming, everything that I need to do, again, in a team of one. What advice do you have being asked to build a full-scale customer marketing program as a team of one, like doing everything, case studies, events, advocacy, community, etc.?
It's a good question. I think the biggest thing is focus on a few things instead of trying to spread yourself too thin. But what I mean by a few things is maybe tackle, no more than 3 key initiatives that you want to be able to accomplish in a year. But make sure that you pressure test those initiatives with your stakeholders. So you're not just building it based on what you think would be the right type of outcome. Make sure that your bosses align, make sure your executives understand why this matters, and start to, if you can get your stakeholders to align their goals with yours, it creates that accountability and that outcome where it becomes a shared goal that everyone focuses on together. So an example of that could be, if you want to build out a customer advisory board, why does it make sense to build one? Well, number one, you get a strategic input from your senior customers at the C-suite level. It builds the roadmap for, future strategy direction. You can make another case around building out a customer reference program and how it drives deal velocity, outcomes around, number one, helping you build out a customer advocate base, but being able to influence sales and deals, etc. So those are kind of some examples you can kind of think about. So hopefully that's helpful. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Any questions from the audience, additional ones? Happy to take those. If not, first of all, thank you, Kevin, for joining and sharing all that. I think you have some courses, so we can share those later on in the follow-up email for people. Like you just touched 30 minutes, 40 minutes of Kevin's brain, but as you can see, there's a lot he can share with you. So taking courses that he's done, I think, is super beneficial and helpful. So we're happy to share those links as well. And again, thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing all this knowledge and best practices. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Yeah, if we don't have any other questions, then appreciate all of your time and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thanks again. Appreciate the time. If you guys have questions, so you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm usually pretty available.
Connect to Kevin on LinkedIn.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Bye-bye.